You know, the 414 window has always been a missiological concept. It's about the practice, reflection on the practice of mission. And so one of the things that a lot of people, including myself, are trying to do now is explore more deeply the theological and the missiological foundations for the 414 movement from a biblical standpoint and from a missiological standpoint. We had a very interesting conference in Seoul, Korea in February where we brought together about 140 missiologists and theologians from around the world to look at Scripture with the child in the midst. And one of the things we're seeing is that, in fact, there's a lot of Scripture that has to do with the child, and a lot of it is theologically significant, and now more than ever we're seeing that it's missiologically significant. This has to do with children and young people engage themselves as agents for mission. It has to do with how God uses children, speaks directly to children. We had about 140 people who talked to us about Scripture, about their experience with God directly speaking to children. So the Missiology Conference was in the stream of reflection that goes back to the Child Theology Conference in Nairobi, where we asked ourselves the question, Jesus placed a child in the midst of a theological argument. Who's going to be the greatest in this new kingdom? Jesus placed a child in the midst. Unless you become like this child, never mind being the greatest, you won't even be part of that kingdom. We had a conference in Nairobi, the Now and Next Theological Conference on Children, asking ourselves, what does it say to us theologically? And now we're moving to the missiological side of things. What does it say to us about the practice of missions? What does it say to us about the agency of children in missions? What does it say to us about the way that God uses children and speaks to them? And we saw scripture after scripture that gave us new insight, fresh insights, scriptures that we're all familiar with. I really appreciated looking anew at Samuel, raising Samuel. We know the story. Everybody knows the story of Samuel. What new missiological insights can we find from that? But in fact, there are many. Here's a mother who is desperate to have a child. She prays. She's abused even in her own home. In Hannah's culture, barren women were an outcast, and she's desperate to have a child. She prays, God answers her prayer. Second chapter of Samuel, she praises God about how God chooses whom He will. He chooses adults, He chooses young people. And Hannah fulfills her promise, takes Samuel to the temple, and it says 3 times that Samuel ministered before the Lord in the temple. God speaking directly to him. And everybody knows the story in Samuel chapter 3. Samuel, Samuel. Little Samuel gets up and goes to Eli. You called for me? No, I didn't call. He goes back to bed. It happens a second time, a third time. And finally Eli understands God is speaking directly to Samuel. And God continued to speak directly to Samuel. And we know that Eli was a terrible father. His kids were scoundrels. To add insult to injury, we even hear that he was an old fat man. But he at least was sensitive enough to know that God was speaking directly to Samuel and that he needed to mentor Samuel. And fortunately, the outcome of nurturing and mentoring isn't dependent on adult perfection. If it were, none of us would be successful. But God can use whom He will. He can use imperfect adults, and He can use old people as well as young people, even little boys like Samuel.